How to navigate uncertainty in the maritime industry. Today I have with me Jean-Paul Dezutter, Laytime and Demurrage Specialist in the podcast. Welcome, Jean-Paul.
Thank you, Leon.
Good to have you here. But before we take a deep dive, maybe we should take the audience with us a bit on what is demurrage and what is laytime. What is your job about?
You're asking the most important question first. Laytime and demurrage. There's been copious volumes of books written about it, and to just answer that question and one answer would be, it's a serious challenge to say. But let's say that it's a way of compensating delays and shipping. And as we will see as we go through the conversation, congestion is becoming a really big issue for shipping, and it plays a really important role in addressing those delays. How do you compensate? Basically, if we look at it from a ship owner's point of view, for them it's basically a way of compensating the use of a vessel, because what really happens, as we know, shipping is a derived demand of business. Somebody is selling a commodity to somewhere else, and based on that, a ship owner has to calculate a price based on the duration. So in fact, when you are buying shipping, you're not actually buying, or you're not charging ship, you're buying time. Mm-hmm. You're buying the ship owner's time, you're buying ship time. And based on that, of course, any variance in terms of duration means that it would affect the margin, and in case of congestion, it would affect the margin of the voyage. And obviously that needs to be compensated. And demurrage is a let's say they call it an agreed compensation set in advance, so that you know very well at the end of that voyage, if you've overrun that allowed time, that you will have to pay a specific amount per day, pro rata, as they say. So I'm trying to explain it.
It's a mechanism to deal with the uncertainty for the ship owner. Is
absolutely,
that
absolutely,
short way
yes,
of saying?
Yes, absolutely. And especially, like I said, nowadays, it's with what's going on. If we look at geopolitical challenges, we only need to think about what's going on in Ukraine, what's going on in Israel, and the consequences or the fallout of that in the Red Sea. If we look on the climate aspect, what's going on in the Panama Canal, there's so many things, and this all has an effect on congestion, on port stays. And we as a company, a lot of what we do is basically audits. So we do audits on trade lanes for companies, for clients, audits on specific ports where they see we have issues. How can we address those issues? How can we address? Are there ways, and there are ways, and we'll get to that later. Are there ways to address that congestion, or to deal with that uncertainty, as you say? And what we've found over the years that things are definitely shifting, in the sense that before, demurrage was really a measure to compensate for delays that were accrued in the port. Nowadays, we are seeing that the ports are actually, dry bulk. I'm not talking about container. The port operation is usually quite efficient, but it's the waiting time before you can get to the berth, and that is becoming a real issue.
Yeah. Maybe it's good to dive a bit deeper into that topic, but what I really like and I want to share with you was actually a quote that I got from your website, and I think it's good for the audience. God must have been a ship owner, placing raw materials far from where they were needed and covering 2/3 of the earth with water. Ness, who was a ship owner.
Yep,
I had a look at it, but I think God was also a friend of the Laytime and the Demurrage specialist in that sense, with the crane breakdowns and bad weather and acts of God even that are being covered in the charter parties. But I think it's good to zoom in a bit more on the mechanisms. How is the industry actually picking up or dealing with that uncertainty on that? What are the mechanisms? The charter party.
The charter party. Yeah, it's been it's the, let's say, the cornerstone of shipping shipping commodities, and rightly so, as it says in the quote. As shipping is basically derived demand. It doesn't exist without without trade, without somebody buying a commodity somewhere. And usually the commodities are spread all over the globe. And one way, obviously, to let's say to make sure this happens in an efficient way, and this has been going on for hundreds of years. There is proof that even I think the Phoenicians had a sort of a document. And actually, do you know where the word comes from, Leon?
No.
Charter party?
No.
Carta partita. And carta partita meant a torn, divided chart. So what happened was they would draw up an agreement, and it would be torn in two. And one person would get, the shipper would get his half, and then the receiver would get his half, or the ship owner or the charterer. But that's the origin or the history of the charter party. And it goes back a long time. But that also means, having said that, that also means that there is a lot of judicial information on issues. So over the years, a number of all sorts of scenarios have occurred, and almost all scenarios have ended up in one way or another in court or arbitration. And from that, the charter party has grown into a very flexible document, meaning that parties can. Most charter parties are, should say, under common law, in English law, and that allows for great flexibility. You can, agree to anything, and the courts will make sure that you, stick to what you've agreed to. So that is the mechanism to make sure that commodities are shipped in an efficient way.
And which parties are then part of that charter party? Who is involved?
Well, and the merge, I have to say or emphasize that in the merge only occurs in voyage charter parties. And time charter parties, it's different because you hire the vessel per day, and no matter what. But as a vessel operator, of course, you will pass on if you're running into a delay in a port, you will pass on the delay. The charter will pay every day, but your voyage charter or the receiver will have to pay on a daily basis the demurrage based on the demurrage rate. I'm lost a bit now with the
like who is involved? Like
who's involved? The stakeholders.
Yeah, the stakeholders in the charter party.
First of all, in the charter party, it's only the ship owner and the charterer, and especially in dry bulk commodities, and depending on under what terms the commodity has been bought or sold, whether it's CFR or FOB, it's either the shipper who becomes the charterer, or the receiver who becomes the charterer of the ship. Very often there may be an intermediary, so it is quite complex in some ways to. It takes a bit of time to really see and understand who are the actual stakeholders. And what's happening now, what we are seeing now is that before, it's called privity of contract, you have the two parties and nobody else is involved there. And we are now seeing signals that even terminals are trying to align their contracts in view of their client, who's then saying, "I will be chartering a vessel. How how will that affect? How are we looking at loading or discharging speeds? How are we looking at turnaround times, stuff like that?
Yeah, there are things that we
And we shouldn't forget that charter party, like I said, it's shipping's derived demand. We shouldn't forget that above that charter party there is a sales contract. Like I said, there is a shipper and a receiver. There is a seller and a buyer, and it's quite important that the terms in that charter party are aligned with what's going on in that, and that can really lead to complex situations. So that's one of the challenges.
Oh, that's one. That was my question. Actually, there are many parties involved. There are a lot of dependencies or uncertainties at a loading
One of
terminal.
the challenges is, like we said, a privity of contract, where you have two parties. Now, imagine you run into delays. It becomes difficult to impose terms, for instance, onto the terminal, because that terminal has no party to that contract. And that might very well be that those two parties say, well, listen, it's none of your business. We are not going to share details, but it may be quite important as well. So it's that. But I see that, I think there is a trend, and I see people being more proactively getting involved and getting, in that entire supply chain, so to speak, realizing what their. Before I had the impression that, let's say like this, before I had the impression that stakeholders were all on their island. You had the ship agent, you had the stevedores or the terminal handlers, and then you had the charters, and it wasn't always that easy to get that data or to share data, and also standardization, digitalization, that brings standardization of contracts.
I think that was one of the things that attracted me or Tech Play as a company into the industry, is actually the complexity of what is happening in a port call. And if you talk about a port call, you do not have a port call without loading. You do not have any discharge without loading. So having all these kind of things.
And if we look at Laytime and Demurrage, this specifically addresses the risks of delay while in port. So they are quite important, of course. Yeah.
I think that's good. That's a good point. And the terminals not playing a role. And from my experience and the conversations I did have with terminal, many of the terminals have actually excluded everything that has to do with delays or whatsoever in their contracts. So it's good to hear that there is a drive in the industry to actually pick that challenge up jointly, because
you will see that very often also charterers dealing with terminals will also impose performance, certain levels of performance, or require certain levels of performance of those terminals, and if those performance levels aren't met, then they risk being penalized for it. But that needs to then also, basically what they are trying to do is pass on that demurrage bill. You've promised me that discharging would take 5 days. It took 10 days. Now I'm having to pay demurrage. I want to pass on that cost because you made me a promise, which obviously you couldn't keep up. Now I want to pass on that. But that also means contracts, agreements, and more. It's getting really, and you see it's changing. It's changing.
Yeah. Are there specific trends that have triggered this change?
There's a couple of things going on in shipping, as you know. The first one is a regulation. The means to address the reduction of greenhouse gas emission. That's one of the trends. Also, the search for the application of new fuels or alternative fuels. It's going in a lot of directions now, which also creates uncertainty for ship owners as in the industry, because if you are going to build a new vessel, what fuel will it burn? People are looking at ammonia, for smaller vessels at hydrogen, so that it's all interconnected, and that's definitely that's one of the trends definitely that we see, there is one thing that
struck me when I was taking a deeper dive into everything that has to do with demurrage, laytime, or charter parties in that statement. There is this urge of being more proactive. The industry is known for being quite reactive. And one of the examples I found astonishing was like the as per previous sentence. We see that agents, but I also learned it is being used in charter parties as well.
It's kicking in an open door, as they say, if you say that shipping's a conservative industry. But I wouldn't be so eager now to make this statement because I think the industry is really doing their utmost and we see a lot of changes with also shipping companies, ship owners realizing that they are part of the entire chain, and you really see that like I say, a proactive, it's also about relationships. We see long-term relationships. It makes a lot of sense, of course, both as a charter or a ship owner, to build a long-term relationships, to have to address issues, to be able to address concerns that you have with specific ports. With some ports, some ports are well known for being congested, for being prone to delays. So how do you address this? Well, I had a very particular case where this was a charter where they had the impression that they were being where they were in a less favorable position when it came to contracting, because they not always had a good grasp of the very specific terms and the conditions that are very specific to charter parties, and they can be ambiguous. But then I think the first step to be is then to really indicate that and tell your counterpart, listen, I'm not comfortable. Can you explain? Can you elaborate a little bit on this so that we understand? And that's what you're seeing as well. And that's of course what common law allows, is that you can really model your contracts to your trade lanes, to your specific ports, to even to specific seasons when you're going into you have a specific trade lane, and at certain periods you are going to meet seasonal weather issues or even congestion. If you look at soybean meal shipping from Brazil, that always creates in that season, it creates congestion and so definitely.
And the other thing, is there really an understanding of how big the exposure to laytime and demurrage is in the industry? What I find interesting is, like, I see numbers of millions. Like our demurrage bill is tens of millions, 12 of millions on that end. That's a significant number, right?
One of the biggest problems is with demurrage when industrial companies and trading companies, when they are budgeting their transport cost, they look at freight rates. But what you can't budget is the congestion. What you can't budget is what will the demurrage rate be, because the demurrage rate doesn't necessarily reflect the freight rate. So that is actually a trigger, when a CFO gets this, they budgeted, I'm just saying something, $20 million in freight, and then when they get the actuals, we spent 30 million. What is this? How come? Well, there's this thing called the demurrage, and how do we address this? So that creates the awareness, and I really have the impression that that is, and there's this, also. Let's say, pushed by the industry itself, seeing that, and search for efficiency and it's not only efficiency. In some cases, it's driven by safety concerns. I'll tell you in a minute. But especially that drive for efficiency, that awareness is really present now, and we see that at least with the traders that we're dealing with nowadays, is that they are why the traders? They are at the receiving end. They are receiving those demurrage bills. If we look at the case of safety concerns, one fantastic initiative that's being applied at the moment is the port of Newcastle in Australia, where at any given day around 70 vessels would be on the anchorage. So that not only does that create an efficiency issue for that port, in terms of allocating berths and so on, but it also creates a safety concern. If you have 70 vessels on a plot bobbing around, you have the Great Barrier Reef nearby. You don't want any accidents.
And the drifting part is also a safety concern.
So that is one of the concerns there, and one of the ways to address this.
And so we were discussing like the change in the industry, new fuels. On the other hand, the greenhouse gases. We were mentioning the Esper previous part. Yep. Is that also one of the people do not want to change things. There is a reluctance to change. No. So the Esper previous is I think a kind of an answer to like, I do not want to change. I know what I have.
No,
but is this helping?
I think Esper previous very often is because it's comfortable. As they've, somebody drew up a charter party, or the broker had drawn up a very good charter party, and both parties were happy with it, and they would continue, building on that as a what do you call it, a boilerplate contract. But often what you would see, is what I see at least in the cases that I get, is that it organically grows by what they call the rider clauses, the additional clauses that are being added. So something, I'm just out of my head saying something. Imagine all of a sudden a different port is now being used, and you're being confronted with swell. You've had delays because of swell. So the next time you want to make sure that that it doesn't affect you, or that risk is well calculated, that risk is defined. So one of the ways then to do that is in that rider they will still fix as per previous. As per the boilerplate contract, but would have changed a couple of things. And you see, a rider growing over the. I have clients using as per previous, like you say, based on contracts of 10 years ago. But if you would go back on the history of that rider, of that charter party additional term, you would have seen that evolution of things that are the only. Let's say risk there is that you can change so much, but then you really need to take out. You have to avoid that you create ambiguity, and this happens a lot. People have one clause in a contract, and they want to change it. They put in a new clause and then leave the old clause in, and then you create all sorts of if something does happen. It can create a lot of issues and disputes and concerns.
I think one of when you started your intro, you say also, man, I'm doing a lot of audits, and we've discussed about this topic. Really, also not only looking at what is the demurrage or what is the waste within that contract, but taking a deeper dive. Can you elaborate a bit on that?
Yeah, basically what we do is, if we run an audit, is the first thing we do is look for accuracy. So if you get a claim, is it accurate? And then secondly, you want to know what is the root cause of those claims. And then to do that, we really need to do a historical audit on specific ports, on specific trade lanes, going back in time, looking at what caused specific delays at a specific port, and it's quite revealing often. And where people, I literally had cases where the port congestion was actually could actually be addressed and avoided by just investing in an extra silo capacity, which then that specific client did, and they invest. If you're looking at $1 million and just a bit of silo capacity, additional silo capacity, what you can avoid, by a capital expense, what you can, avoid in the marriage. If that means that, I've seen crazy stories and really proactive solutions. But that, that like Mario was saying, that hyper awareness, and that's really something. And I get the impression that people are taking the holistic approach, are looking at the wider context of things, and that is a good evolution. And then going back to what you said on, as the industry still as conservative, I would dare to say no. There's really a shift going on.
There's a shift going on.
Yeah.
That's good. That's good to.
And the awareness, but then how to tackle that? Of course, that's where where tech play comes in.
That is what I feel is like. It's a complex. There are many parties involved, and there are a lot of dependencies, and that is why this contract, the charter party, has been written up. But as far as I have seen it, it has been used to use it in hindsight, less, and it was very hard to actually use that and make that more proactive or become more proactive. Learn from these kind of. I think the audits that you, the audits that you are doing are for me a good example.
A very steep learning curve.
Okay. I would like to thank you, Jean-Paul, for the interview. I really enjoyed it.
I could have gone on for another hour or so.
You want to continue? That's very good. But thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Leon. Thank you for having me.